anybody there? It seems I'm all alone again. Does anybody care? This planet's empty. I see no signs of life. Please don't tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Monday, May 15th, 2023. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. On Out to Coop Live, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyard and from across the country. You can also join us at the end of the week for our Friday Politics Roundup, where we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. And you can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. You can help support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. $5 a month. It's like a good beer once a month. How could you beat it? $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress today. And you can help out the show right now by heading to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And for more PA progressive talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern. You can get him wherever you see his streams. For all the details, head on over to ricksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. And you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on the Twitter at the Night Caucus. That's at the Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. And if you haven't heard, I don't know where you've been, right? The Signal is a new podcast from the Bucks County Beacon. The Signal is hosted by the Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Nicolaico, and is produced by yours truly. Twice a month, the Signal will shine a light on the right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. Cyril invites guests who can provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions so that we can steer the community toward calmer, saner, progressive roots. You can check out the podcast at buckscountybeacon.podbean.com, or you can pick it up wherever you get your podcast. And for all you gamers out there, the Game Inn, that's with two N's, the Game Inn is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything for retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. And kids get discounts so they get A's in the report card. You can't beat it. Check them out on their Facebook page. Follow them on Twitter at The Game Inn, at The Game Inn. Got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayMan. That's with two N's, at SongADayMan on Twitter. And you know what's happening. Yes, we are in election season. We cannot let Paul Martino, Moms for Liberty, and their oligarch friends buy our schools and push extremist politics in our community. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Levelfield to launch a truly community-rooted pact to invest in organizing, supporting local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmasking the toxic organizations injecting our communities with right-wing extremism. We're putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money. You can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. And out to Coop Live, for those of you folks who were here earlier today, we had Christina Marusik on the show talk about her new book, A New War on Cancer, The Unlikely Heroes Revolutionizing Prevention. Christina is an investigative reporter for Environmental Health News, and her book just came out last week. It's excellent, so check out our interview and go pick up her book. Well, on tonight's episode, I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Kathryn Joyce to the program. We'll be talking about her recent article in Church and State, Mad Moms, a new Christian nationalist front group claims to champion parental involvement in public education. Critics say there's a little more nefarious agenda afoot. Mad Moms takes a deep dive into Moms for Liberty and their deep pockets and their growing extremism. Now, Kathryn Joyce is an investigative editor at In These Times, a freelance investigative reporter and the author of two books, The Child Catchers, Rescue Trafficking and the New Gospel of Adoption, and Quiverfull, Inside the Christian Patriarchy Movement, which I cannot recommend enough. Go out and get those two as well. Now, she was formerly a reporter with Type Investigations and Salon, a contributing editor at The New Republic, and a contributing writer at Highline. Her work has also appeared in numerous publications, including Mother Jones, Vanity Fair, The Marshall Project, Longreads, The New York Times Magazine, Vox, The American Prospect, The Intercept, The Nation, Cosmopolitan, Adirondack Life, the Atlantic, Biz, the Harvard Divinity Bulletin, and many more. Like, she just rocks, let me just tell you. She's formerly the editor of Political Research Associates quarterly magazine, The Public Eye, and she teaches as an adjunct lecturer at Brooklyn College's Political Science Department. Welcome to the show, Kathryn. I appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. My pleasure to be here.
Well, as you know, as we've talked about a little bit, and I gave you a little bit of the context, and you're familiar with the Moms for Liberty issue and this kind of growing extremism that we're seeing at the level of school boards, particularly from religious right and kind of, and the far right, has, it's basically been the environment we've been swimming in here in Bucks County for quite some time. Now, your work, however, has charted these kind of religious right movements for, as I said, for a while now. And, maybe just as a way to kind of stepping back before we get into the specifics of Moms for Liberty, can you talk a little bit about how you ended up on this beat, so to speak, right? Looking at this kind of religious right movements and really kind of charting some of the emerging movements kind of as they're coming out.
Yeah, sure. And thank you again for having me. I guess the super long picture view is that basically, one of the first writing opportunities that I had back getting close to 2 decades ago now was working with a guy who's now my friend, who became my mentor, Jeff Charlotte, a really excellent reporter, and he hired me when I was going to school to work with him on a project called The Revealer, which was, these were early days of blogs, so this was kind of like 1.0 or 1.5 at
the
least.
Rise
anyway.
Of the blogosphere, right?
Yeah. And so we worked together on this blog put out by New York University that was looking at the way religion was covered by the news. And this was, kind of smack in the middle of the W years, the Bush 2 years, and the war in Iraq. And, it was a time when the role of evangelicalism was kind of suddenly getting this renewed attention. A lot of people were paying attention to it. A lot of really shabby kind of news coverage of it too. Just kind of people, I think there's more familiarity with this pattern these days than there was then. But sort of the way that a lot of the mainstream media can bend over backwards in an attempt to avoid being called the liberal media, and in so doing, just give kind of carte blanche to a whole kind of segment of kind of the political reality that they don't want to look too hard at because they're afraid that maybe that's going to be mean, I guess. And so that was sort of how I started working on this topic. It paid for my grad school, and through that, my job as the managing editor of The Revealer was, finding examples of religion coverage every day for us to write about, and it just became this sort of quick education in a lot of what was going on, just kind of looking at a lot of different sources, and stumbling on a lot of different things. That is, you mentioned my first book, Quiverfull. That is, definitely was one of the stepping stones on the way to stumbling upon that movement. So yeah, that's kind of the deep backstory. And then I think with many writers or reporters or podcasters, one thing that you learn about leads you to the next thing that you learn about. You tumble down a rabbit hole and you just start to find more and more things. So that's sort of kind of I think, how you gain a bit of expertise in a niche.
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting, I think, one of the challenges I could see in the kind of reporting that you've been doing and paying attention to these movements, and it feels like this is cyclical, like where these movements start to emerge, and there's a tendency among say mainstream media, kind of especially cable news and things like that, to really kind of dismiss this as kind of, this is fringe, this is going to go away, this is not a big deal, these are just a kind of bunch of crazies that are out there. But in reality, these movements, they seem more like laboratories, like for where they're kind of working out kind of ideologies and practices and networks of connection, with a real agenda of building power. I mean, I'm not sure if that's how you would see that, but that's always been my sense of what's happening there.
I absolutely would agree with that. I mean, I've thought about a lot of movements, because a lot of things that I've written about have been niche, and say the Quiverfull movement. For listeners who don't know, this is a movement of fundamentalist Christians, and I'm using that term carefully, not as in a pejorative sense, but if evangelicalism is a much more mainstream form of Christian faith, fundamentalism is stricter, more insular, lots of different kind of distinctions. But it was a fundamentalist Christian movement, very tied to homeschooling, that believed in families having as many children as they could, both as sort of this ultimate demonstration of their anti-abortion convictions. We will prove that every child is a blessing by accepting every possible child that we can have. And also, they would talk about this as kind of this long-term game plan to win back the culture demographically. We are just going to outbreed our enemies. And
they use that language explicitly, right? I mean, this
very,
is not
very
just
explicitly.
Right.
I mean, like it's very militaristic language. It was not ever a huge movement. I estimated that it was tens of thousands of people. I've talked to people who've left that movement who said, actually, we think it was much higher. But in any case, that is not, that's not a demographic, like talking about the Southern Baptist Convention or the Catholic Church. But what it is a vanguard. It's an intellectual vanguard. And I think a lot of people kind of like to sneer at the idea of there being a kind of a Christian right in intellectual movement, but there certainly is. I mean, they are writing books, they are kind of doing a lot of kind of worldview creation, and there is a role for these movements that kind of, I think, get dismissed as fringe a lot, but really are shaping kind of a very purist view of kind of politics and a movement that, by the time it filters down in some sort of function, in some way to kind of more mainstream circles, it has become popularized. Like Quiverfull adherents might say, you should try to have between 10 and 20 children. By the time that gets kind of popularized by, a group like the Southern Baptist Convention, it's no longer kind of talking like explicitly about patriarchy. It's talking about complementarianism, that men and women have complementary gender roles. So I think there's like a really important role that these quote unquote fringe groups play in pushing the envelope, in kind of keeping things moving ever rightward. And then these things, by and by, they show up in much more mainstream parts of the right.
Yeah, it's really good to hear you use the word kind of an intellectual vanguard too as well, because I do think that going along with what you're saying there is like, when we're talking about intellectual here, there's that tendency to say, well, there's no like PhD after their name, so therefore, right? Or there's not, like, which is not what we're talking about. We're talking about intellectual movements, right? I used to think about this, on the left, there used to have a labor movement, right? When the labor movement was vibrant, is that there was all sorts of publications and thinking about organizational strategy and kind of how you kind of engage with people on how to actually lay this stuff out, which is very much kind of not tied to like institutional like credentialism, but was rather about the kind of really thinking through the ideas of organizing on the left. And that's virtually, dried up with the decimation of the labor movement for sure.
This is a little off topic, but I am honor bound to interject here that you should all read In These Times magazine if you want to read about those labor movements, and lots else.
If you didn't, I would have, because I've been a subscriber of In These Times for quite some time. I used to buy it off the shelf, like way back in the day. Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. If people have not reading In These Times, we frequently cite them on the show, kind of different articles that come out of there, because it is an absolutely stellar, kind of example of this kind of intellectual, broad kind of intellectual, kind of with a small I, right? Kind of movement intellectualism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Drawing. Yeah, absolutely. And I think drawing from people who are parts of these movements as intellectual leaders, which I think is brilliant and important, and also kind of to steer us back to what we are talking about, is something that happens on the right all the time as well. For sure.
Yeah, and so let's get into this with Moms for Liberty, because Moms for Liberty seems to, I think, for many people, say casual observers who aren't paying really close attention to what's actually happening on the ground in these movements, Moms for Liberty seem to come out of nowhere, right? And that's part of kind of like their own origin story, right? I mean, it's kind of, as you say in your article, like Mad Moms, new Christian nationalist front groups claim to champion parental involvement in public education, that this idea of this, here's a simple background and we're just a bunch of moms, right? When you kind of connect that and say, okay, there's the origin story versus let's look at these deep networks of connections in here. Can you talk a little about both that kind of the origin story, the story that they're telling, and then who these people actually are and who they're connected to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Maurice Cunningham, who is a former professor, he's the author of a book called Dark Money. He wrote this excellent report for a group called Network for Public Education. They're public education advocates. He wrote a great report about Moms for Liberty, in which he kind of really made this point that Moms for Liberty likes to tell this story that they're just two plucky moms selling t-shirts out of their garage, and they were just really concerned about all of the smut and the COVID masking and the CRT that they were seeing in their schools, and they just decided, by golly, we're going to do something about it. And Cunningham, I think in this long report, really takes this apart in noting actually within like a couple of weeks, and certainly within a couple of months of their founding, this Moms for Liberty had been featured all over the right-wing media ecosystem. That literally within a couple of weeks, just within days of launching, they were ranking really high profile in basically endorsements from all kinds of right-wing media stars. This was kind of being pushed out on social media, and they were getting the sort of boost that I think real grassroots organizations could only dream of. They were getting like ACLU in the middle of a major lawsuit levels of media coverage, and this just really kind of rocketed them into kind of the center of right-wing and Republican kind of conversations about where the politics of the movement and the party were going. In reality, it is not that kind of plucky just selling t-shirts story. They were getting some major donations. Not all of those are known, but some of them are. They got a significant amount of money from Julie Fancelli, who is this right-wing donor in Florida. She is the heiress of the Publix grocery store chain. She's probably also best known for being the person who funded almost all of the rally that preceded the riot on January 6th. She footed the bill for Kimberly Guilfoyle's speech personally, I believe. Moms for Liberty also got a pretty big boost last year from the Leadership Institute, which is this decades-old conservative organization that that trains conservative activists to go out and be effective, to go be kind of effective quasi, supposedly grassroots activists, actually AstroTurf activists. And there are a number of other donations that were guiding this that are just not yet known. But beyond that, there is also the fact that these supposedly just plucky moms they're really pretty sophisticated women with a lot of skills. One of the founders of Moms for Liberty, is a communications professional herself. One of the other co-founders, who has sort of since kind of publicly distanced herself from the group, even though she's still, very much working towards the same ends, is married to a man who runs a Republican micro media targeting strategy firm, who also just became the head, the chairman of the Florida Republican Party. When they had their big confab, their kind of first annual Moms for Liberty Joyful Warriors Summit.
That kills me.
Joyful Warriors.
Sorry, I just I can't get past it. They're calling it again in Philadelphia. Again, it's Joyful Warriors too.
Yeah. Maybe somebody else is going to get a sword, because last year Ron DeSantis got like a really pretty looking blue sword, the Liberty Sword. But Ron DeSantis was there, and so were, a number of other really prominent people, other prominent Republican politicians, definitely kind of the who's who of, right-wing education activists, which is this whole kind of celebrity tier now. I mean, these are now the people that might sound kind of square still, but these are the people who get invited to CPAC and all of the other conferences, because it has been found that this is a really winning issue for Republicans. I was just talking about the Moms for Liberty co-founder, who's married to the head of the Florida Republican Party. That co-founder is named Bridget Ziegler. She's now the chair woman of the Sarasota County School Board, and her husband, Christian Ziegler, he's the one who runs micro-targeted media. He said back in 2021 to the Washington Post, paraphrasing here, but that he had been trying for years and years to try to figure out how are we going to get like 20, 30 something year old women to be invested in the Republican Party, and just had been stumped. This is not a natural kind of pairing. And he said, and Moms for Liberty basically did it for me. Like they have made this connection. So it has become this very valuable constituency to the Republican Party. And honestly, I mean, like these politics have basically become a huge part of the whole party platform across the nation. You're seeing it a lot in certain states. In Pennsylvania, you're certainly seeing it a lot, but everywhere.
Yeah, Pennsylvania is the second largest, at least latest reporting I've seen, second largest number of chapters in the country, next to Florida. Wow. And you mentioned Bridget Ziegler, of course. She was recently in the news because she's the head of the Sarasota Board of Education, which was just trying to put through the Hillsdale College Vermillion. I mean, we know they're essentially the freaking same thing, but whatever. We'll make the distinction of Vermillion education to basically rewrite their curriculum in the version of this kind of Christian nationalist thing. They failed there. They did not fail here, as our listeners are well aware.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of stunning to watch that. I mentioned to you before the show that I've been for the last couple of months in the process of reporting a piece about Sarasota County. And so I was paying a lot of attention to that discussion about Vermillion when it was proposed there. And, the surprising vote by a couple of the conservative members to side with the only moderate kind of liberal member in blocking it. And after that, I did see that Bridget Ziegler wrote on Facebook, basically it should have been us. We should have been leading on this.
Yeah, she was pissed. Yeah, she was legitimately pissed. It's interesting. And I do, to go back to a point, I don't want to lose this thread that you mentioned before, because one of the things that about Moms for Liberty doing the work of, say, the Republican Party, and particularly the kind of, the right wing of the Republican Party. I don't even know if we can use that language anymore, because it seems like that is dominating.
Good question.
Yeah, Republican politics. But it seems like the Moms for Liberty it's a, I hate to use these kind of words with this, but really a brilliant kind of entity, in the sense that it's making use of all the ideological kind of like baggage of, say, motherhood, of not kind of like not doing the Trump move, which is kind of like belittling women, but it's actually women led. And, that's, again, Republicans are not known for kind of, given the platform to women and women's organizations. So to see that, but just like you said, really solves a whole bunch of problems for them at once, especially when you can make it a local issue and you pair the moms with the kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really powerful. I mean, I think there's probably lots of examples of this in Pennsylvania that you're seeing as well, but I know, kind of looking at Florida, within kind of conservative social media circles, members of Moms for Liberty are, held up being like, look, this is the paragon of modern womanhood. I mean, so it is kind of being described in that way. And I mean, I think, historians and feminist historians and historians of the right would point out, this is an old model.
Exactly.
You can go back, many decades, and look at, a lot of women who have, I'm not saying that Republican women as a whole lack agency, for sure, but I think within a party where, as Christian Ziegler himself was pointing out, it was a hard sell to a lot of women for a long time. There is kind of this role that is kind of being created and expanded, that you could be a warrior, quote, for your children. I mean, the obvious rejoinder to that is that there's parents of all stripes, of all political stripes, who are always being warriors for their children. And, for a lot of them, that means, protecting their children who are Black, or who are, brown, or who are immigrants, or who are LGBTQ. I mean, it's a deceptive sort of framing, but it's very powerful, and it's language that's being used to cover all kinds of agendas that don't really have anything to do with that. I mean, if you're talking suddenly about, I don't know, the need to ban lots of books,
Exactly.
not because they are sexually explicit, but because they mention a boy having a crush on another boy, or because they feature, or kind of focus on primarily, students of color, or
Yep.
a character that would be, more representative of students of color. I mean, like, that has nothing to do with protecting your children from groomers, but you wrap it in this language of joyful warrior, of mama bear. I mean, we've seen these shows before, for sure.
Absolutely. And it's, and it's remarkable to see where, and you mentioned this in the article, where you're seeing, this legislation that's being pushed to be passed around, parental rights and so on, right? Is basically, it's arguing for things that already exist, right? I mean, that's the astounding part about this, is like, they're going out there with like, shields and armor, saying that we are going to give, and these, like, you're looking at what the codes already are, right? You're looking at what the laws already are, and you're like, you're basically just talking about, but they're like just rebranding it and reskinning it with, as if it's this Christian nationalist kind of like agenda item. And I think it's left a lot of like just everyday parents who have been doing the, like, the hard work of making sure that kids are protected and all that for decades. It leaves them kind of flat footed with like, we already have this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in early March, this federal Parents' Bill of Rights Act was introduced, and the things that it was going to offer was allowing parents to meet with their children's teachers, allowing parents to address the school board. I mean, are there places in this country where these things cannot yet happen? That the public needs to be able to see school budgets and spending. Um, you know, it's just these are very much things that already exist. But again, I mean, there is, apologies for the horns, but there's a much deeper kind of fight that's going on, that these things, I think, serve as cover for frequently. If you have everybody kind of rending their garments over the idea that there is, CRT or SEL in schools, then they're going to be so worked up on that they might not notice that the voucher expansion that the governor signed the year before has now stripped $70 million from your school district. And so I think a lot of the people that I've been talking to in Florida and elsewhere, whenever I'm reporting on education, have been pointing out, again and again, like, that distraction is part of this bigger, longer game plan that is destroying public education, and that has been, a Republican wish for decades that is now probably closer than it's ever been, to being something that could come true.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because there's two kind of related things to this point that I'm curious your take on, and how you make sense. Because for me, one of the things that what's been happening here locally in the school boards, especially around all the CRT stuff, the God forbid we have social and emotional learning, and the anti-masking stuff, all the nonsense that took place in the wake of the pandemic, that came out, and where we are kind of led us to where we are now. Anyways, was that there was this guy, Paul Martino, right? He's this kind of venture capitalist based in Bucks County. He lives at one district over from me. He's been funding all these school board races, dropping $10,000 per race, right, in these little tiny school board races. After the last election, he came out and basically there were two Democratic women who won election, and he basically kind of put them on notice. Basically said right away, okay, you, right, you need to excuse yourself from contract negotiations because the teachers union kind of supported you in your run. And I'm like, this dude's coming after the teachers unions, right? Which is part of this long-term agenda of basically, doing the Betsy DeVos move, is saying, we're fine with taking public money for public education, but we want to basically take that money and put it into religious schools. Right. So we're fine with taking public money, but we just want to be able to determine where it's going to go. Right. We want to be able to teach religion and our kids there. And so how much of this, like, is, on the one hand, is that agenda? And then the other thing that you mentioned in your piece, which I found, I was like, this is like right on the money in so many ways, that say Republican activists, particularly right-wing Republican activists, recognizing the power of generating votes at a local level, right, in order to affect, say, statewide elections, or to affect, like House of Representatives. Because basically, if you get more people who are not normally going to vote getting out there to vote, then that's actually going to increase numbers. I mean, I don't know if I'm saying that very well, but I mean, those are two things that I see at play in one of your piece.
Yeah. No, I think that's really true. And I think one of the things that was really interesting about last summer's Moms for Liberty Joyful Warriors Summit is that they were making that argument really explicit. I think that it was Senator Rick Scott in addressing this conference, who told them, and this was an audience that, there were a lot of activists there, but there were also a lot of, would-be school board members. There's this whole kind of class of school board candidates last year that Governor Ron DeSantis got behind in a way that a lot of people said that they had never seen before, that high level of a state official getting involved in such local races. But Rick Scott told the audience that, if you run for school board with kind of all of the energy that is around school politics now, there's going to be sort of this reverse coattails thing going on. I mean, typically you would think about, the top of, the ballot being something that is going to, all of the lower on the ballot races are going to go along with. If everybody comes out to vote for president, then, maybe even if they don't really know who's running in their local races, they're just going to vote kind of their party affiliation. Rick Scott was saying, the reverse might work now. People are going to be so invested in school politics that they might come out just specifically intending to vote for school board. And then they're going to provide the coattails that congressional candidates and Senate candidates could ride upon. Basically, that they could help get these higher level candidates into higher office because people would care so much more about them. And I thought that was really an interesting sort of flipping of things. And then in terms of your first question, I think you were talking about
like defunding public schools.
Defunding public schools. I mean, I think certainly going after teachers' unions has been a huge Republican agenda item for a very long time. There's a lot of reasons for that. They kind of they get to kill a lot of birds with one stone if they do that. But yeah, then the defunding piece is really crucial and I think really troubling and something that we need to pay an awful lot of attention to, because while we are all sort of on the defensive as a society, kind of with all of these like kind of one controversy hitting after another, kind of constantly, it keeps everybody's eyes kind of focused on that. And then school privatization is basically being introduced in ever more explicit ways as the solution to all of the controversies that are kind of dominating the news. And I say ever more explicitly because a lot of right-wing education advocates are becoming just increasingly really blunt about that fact. Christopher Rufo is a name that your audience is probably really familiar with, but kind of he's credited with, not entirely accurately, but he is credited with almost single-handedly making CRT a moral panic in the country. And when he was speaking to Hillsdale College a little more than a year ago, he talked about it sort of in these terms. He said in order to get to universal school choice, which is just euphemism for school privatization, then we need to operate from a position of universal public school distrust. So if you can seed distrust in the public schools so widely, if you can kind of divorce people who tend to actually like their public schools, they're a center of community. It's where a lot of people kind of meet their community. If you're in a sort of small town or medium-sized town or city environment where maybe there's sports or something, that is something that is important to a community. But if you can kind of get people angry at their schools instead, you can maybe get them towards thinking, there's so many problems. Oh, these woke teachers, they're trying to make my kid trans, or they're trying to make my kid Antifa, or BLM, or kind of whatever kind of configuration of letters.
Trying to make my poor little white kid feel bad about themselves for being white. I mean,
exactly. Then you increasingly have a lot of Republican officials saying you should just take your kids out, homeschool them, put them in a charter school, put them in a private school, get a voucher. And, that is starting to just be, increasingly kind of be more explicit pairing, that there are people who are just saying to get away from all of these upsetting things that we have just been talking to you about kind of nonstop for the last 6 months, you need to support this mega voucher bill that is, going to allow every person in this state, no matter how rich they are, even if their kids have been homeschooled since birth, or even if they've been in, a private evangelical school since birth, we're going to give them $8,000 that they can spend however they want. And, if it ends up bankrupting your entire school district, well, then maybe later on we'll lease those empty school buildings for a nice new private school. So it's sort of circular, but it's I don't know, it's spinning. It feels like it's spinning faster all the time now.
No, absolutely. And when you mentioned that, when Rufo came out and said, Christopher Rufo comes out and says, this is what we need to do, universal distrust of public schools. I have this image at the time of like Naomi Klein holding her book, Shock Doctrine, here, and like pointing and like, this is what I'm talking about. That's what it felt like. We're getting like, almost like Rufo said, like read the book and was like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I'm doing, so thank you for the language.
That is a point of fascination with me, is kind of how much kind of the right ends up reading a lot of leftist theory and making some sort of use of it for themselves. But yeah, I was in the fall, in November 2021, I was in Orlando at a conference of the National Conservatism Movement, and Christopher Rufo was speaking there. And on the last night of the conference, the victory of Glenn Youngkin being elected as governor of Virginia was announced, during the final speeches of that entire conference. And it was like the entire conference just like basically was like crowding around Christopher Rufo to like pat him on the shoulders, and they were like, you showed the way. This is what we're going to do. And it was weird to be there and see that.
Well, it's awesome. Well, listen, I'm already keeping you longer than I promised I would, but so let me ask you one thing to kind of close us out here tonight. It's like, it feels like people are starting to get a sense of who Moms for Liberty is. There's more and more attention that's coming on here, like the work like yours and parents groups seeking it out to try to understand what's happening in their districts. And broadly thinking about what this means, what kind of organizing that has to happen to push this back. And I don't even mean like just on the left. I mean to stop like the crumbling of democracy, of our institutions that have taken so long to build up. How are you seeing the kind of response? Does it seem like this is the knowledge and awareness of what's actually happening within these networks, these right-wing networks, and with organizations like Moms for Liberty? Is that breaking through, and are you seeing kind of organizing in response to that at all?
Well, I mean, sorry to keep making this Florida-centric, but it's just where my mind has been, talking. I talked to a lot of public education advocates when I was reporting there, and a number of people told me that they felt like for a very long time they had been looked at like they were crazy when they said all of these moral panics that are being whipped up are about defunding public education. And they said that, one of them told me that she was more optimistic than she's been in a long time because she felt like people were seeing what was going on. That, another told me that now anytime they're kind of at a public event speaking, the idea of kind of defunding public education or the destruction of public education always comes up. Whereas, before that was sort of, treated as a crackpot theory or something. So, I mean, I feel like, from what I'm hearing, there is more public awareness of that. I mean, I think there have been such kind of bold gambles on the right to go after this. I mean, things like what you're seeing right now in Bucks County, what happened last year in Tennessee with Governor Bill Lee proposing to open dozens of Hillsdale affiliated charters. I think, honestly, just the increased awareness of kind of the larger education project that Hillsdale College is involved with at the K-12 level in public schools. It seems like there's just starting to be more awareness, and I think that's always a good thing. I think advocates who are working as activists on this certainly seem to think that is cause for some cautious optimism, at least that there are more people who are paying attention and want to fight back.
Well, wonderful. I can't think of a better place to leave it tonight. I also just want to thank you for your work, because it really is, I think, so critical. And I've always found that, any kind of movement building, the role of kind of independent media that's actually tracking this stuff is so critical as to providing some of these kind of the tools in the background or resources for struggles, just to be able to help understand what's going on. So thank you so much for your work. Over the years, and not just here on Monster of Liberty, to really help shine a light on some of these movements, to help, so many people help kind of understand what we need to be paying attention to. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, you got it. So everybody, thank you again to Kathryn Joyce for joining us tonight. You can actually follow her on Twitter at Kathryn, that's Kathryn, Kathryn A. Joyce on Twitter. And make sure you also are following at In These Times Mag. That's at In These Times Mag, and subscribe to In These Times if you can. Pick it up at your local bookstore if you can. And you can check out all her work by heading over to KathrynJoyce.com. That's KathrynJoyce.com. Kathryn, I can't wait to see what's coming down the pike next, and we'll be looking for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You got it. Hey, everybody, this is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. Thank you for tuning in for this evening. And once again, for all the work that you're doing there on the ground. We'll keep on bringing it to you as you are organizing. We remind you, get out and vote tomorrow in the PA primaries. A lot going on. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you early in the morning. See ya!